Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and Giallo enthusiasts. This is Tanner Leeser, your host for all things Giallo here on The King in Giallo. Our next stop on our journey through Giallo cinema is the first Giallo film from Riccardo Freda, Double Face, released in 1969. This film is an adaptation of an Edgar Wallace story from Rialto Film, or so they say, and although this film was considered a Giallo in Italy, in West Germany it was considered a krimi film. In this video, I will do a deep dive overview, then segue into a full review and GialliTally. The overview will be spoiler-free, the review and GialliTally will not. Here is Double Face Overview. The film is an Italian and West German co-production and is directed by Riccardo Freda, billed as Robert Hampton. He also wrote the screenplay along with Paul Henge, and the music is by Nora Orlandi, herself billed as Joan Christian. The cast of players are Klaus Kinski as John Alexander, Christiana Krüger as Christine, Sidney Chaplin as Mr. Brown, Margaret Lee as Helen Alexander, Annabella Incontria as Liz, Gunther Stoll as Inspector Stevens, and Barbara Nelli as Alice. The plot of the film follows John Alexander, a successful industrialist who falls in love with Helen. But after a few years of happy marriage, the couple grows apart to the point of both parties engaging in their own affairs. John with Alice, his secretary, and Helen with her friend, Liz. Helen mysteriously dies in a car explosion, which makes John a suspect in the case, prompting him to do what he can to clear his name and to find the guilty ones responsible. But at a point, John becomes convinced that his late wife might not actually be dead. His ensuing journey to find answers leads him down a depraved rabbit hole of drugs and pornography. Double Face is one of these Giallo films from the 60s, 70s, which, because it was a co-production with West Germany, marketed itself as a krimi to sell in the fatherland. This was bolstered by the fact that it was based upon an Edgar Wallace story, which his name has become synonymous with krimi film. But whereas Rialto Film had some success with krimi films such as The Man with the Glass Eye, 1969, and The Dead Woman from Thames, 1971, the genre was getting saturated with films known as faux krimi, as in movies that are krimi only in their name and advertisement, but are in fact Giallo films. Examples include Double Face, but extend later on to the first majorly successful Giallo, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, 1970, and What Have You Done to Solange, 1971. Double Face draws its inspiration from a fistful of movies from the past decade, namely Blow Up, 1966 by Michelangelo Antonioni, Orgasmo, 1968 by Umberto Lenzi, and even Riccardo Freda's own The Terror of Dr. Hitchcock, 1962. Regarding the first two of these films, the film is set in swinging London and deals a fair amount with the culture therein, centered around duplicitous individuals, free love sexual escapades, and experimenting with drugs. But where this film takes a sharp left turn is in its tone of anti-romanticization for this pervasive new lifestyle. Freda takes no part in glamorizing this era, and to the contrary, expresses that what makes this entire culture so attractive does in fact come at the price of something more worthwhile and noble, and fundamentally deeper. And regarding the third of the films, Double Face, plus its director, are more traditional and old school with their approach to the subject matter when compared to the contemporaries surrounding it. The tone is darker, with heavy nods to the gothic, and the character of John has some similarities with Freda's character of Dr. Bernard Hitchcock. The technical aspects of the film which make it a hit include its stellar script, which some prints do also cite Lucio Fulci, Romano Migliorni, and Giambattista Musetto as the ones who crafted the original story. Its tight directing, which is able to deliver the best elements of the screenplay in a manner that makes this Giallo a bit meta with how it approaches the subject of the underground porno ring in relation to the developing genre and its own obsessions with sleaze, making this film cerebral, yet locked in with its strong connection to affecting the audience on a genuine human level. The cinematography, beautifully created by Gabor Pagioni, who was a regular accomplice of Freda's, plus the score, which is among some of the best soundtracks found in Giallo cinema, thanks to Nora Orlandi. With all this good, we must address some of the bad, and in this case it is the first 5 minutes or so of the film. And it does not break it, but that being said, there are a plethora of bad effects spread out like obstacles in a relay which must be overcome, including an obvious toy car, some less than stunning rear projections, and some blatant stock footage. These are all found near the beginning, and once they are done, the movie is top-notch till its climax. Riccardo Freda was born in 1909 in Alexandria, Egypt. He began studying art history, and in the 1930s, he found his way into cinema, beginning as a writer and an assistant director. His debut film was Don Cesare di Bazzan, 1942, but found great success with Return of the Black Eagle, 1946. Although Freda seemed to have a passion for more traditional historical flavored films, plus the popular sword and sandal Pepla films, he would end up making the first Italian horror film of the sound era, together with friend Mario Bava, I Vampiri, 1956, itself holding on to several themes which would inundate the later giallo genre. Funny enough, Freda made the film on a bet, claiming that he could make a horror film in under 12 days, but after 10 days he dropped out of the project and left Bava to finish it. Bava's team ended up taking shortcuts with the special effects, and an abundance of old stock footage was used to pad the runtime to an acceptable amount, and the film did in fact end up getting completed in the 12 days. The film flopped, which Freda credited to Italian audiences being unable to imbibe in horror films, and so henceforth, his horror movie credit would be billed as Robert Hampton, so his career would not be tarnished. Freda would begin directing Kaltiki, the Immortal Monster, 1959, but once again, quit the production, leaving Bava to finish the movie, which he did, while remaining mostly uncredited for his work. This became a normal thing for Freda to do, work on films as a sort of hobby. Freda was independently wealthy and was making bank from breeding horses and making successful bets on horse races. This luxury allowed him to play around with film, but quit whenever the production became too cumbersome for him. Regardless, his best and most well-known films came out of this era of his filmmaking, including The Terror of Dr. Hitchcock, 1962, and The Ghost, 1963, and Doubleface, 1969. All of these films Freda completed himself. In the 1970s, he would put out some less than stellar films such as The Giallo, The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire, 1971, where he was billed as Willy Perito, probably because he didn't finish this picture himself, and then Tragic Ceremony, 1972, which he all but denied having worked on. His final film was Murder Obsession, 1981, and then he walked away from filmmaking for over a decade, occasionally offering his advice to directors such as Bertrand Tavernier. But in 1994, Freda would return to direct Revenge of the Musketeers, which after a fight with the producers, prompted him to, once again, walk away and leave the film to be finished by another, in this case, Tavernier. In 1999, Riccardo Freda passed away at the age of 90. A lot of the heavy lifting in the film is done by the infamous Klaus Kinski, well known throughout European cult cinema, spaghetti westerns, and the films of Werner Herzog. He was born in 1926 in Poland. He began acting on stage and ventured to cinema in the late 1940s. His appearance and volatile energy made him a natural choice to play the villains, and he was known to quarrel with both directors and his fellow actors. His unfavorable reputation was outshined by his talent for acting and knack for bringing in audiences, and thus box office successes. Some of his bigger film credits include Dr. Zhivago, 1965 by David Lean, Buddy Buddy, 1981 by Billy Wilder, Aguirre, The Wrath of God, 1972, and Nosferatu the Vampire, 1979, both directed by Werner Herzog. Apparently, the two of them had a love-hate relationship, and at different times, both men plotted to kill the other one. Kinski would also work with Jess Franco and Antonio Margheriti, which were said to be very positive relationships. In this film, Kinski delivers a marvelous portrayal of a man coming to the very brink of his own sanity, but done with a more relaxed approach. He brings a lot of needed sympathy and humanity to a terribly flawed character. There is a limited report as to whether Kinski and Freda quarreled or got along, but apparently Freda and Kinski did not get along while they were together on set, and Freda even referred to Kinski as the crown prince of assholes. Kinski died in 1991 at 65 years of age due to a heart attack. The supporting cast includes Charlie Chaplin's son, Sidney Chaplin. Margaret Lee, as Helen, gives strength to the role and plays with the layers of mystery which imbue the character. She was born in 1943 in England, but emigrated to Italy in the late 1960s, where she would get a lot of work for appearing in spy thrillers and Pipla. She appears in another giallo, Slaughter Hotel, 1971, starring alongside Klaus Kinski once again. She also appears in The Bloody Judge, 1969, and Venus in Furs, 1969, both by Jess Franco, and once again, starring with Kinski. Lee retired in the mid-1980s from acting, but I digress. On to the review. Spoilers ahead for those of you who haven't yet seen the film. You've been warned. My prediction for the movie's GialliTally score. When I have done this in the past, I've either been familiar with the movie or have at least seen the movie once before, or have already done my recorded film viewing for the Patreon. For Double Face, and at the time of writing this, I have not seen the film yet. I predict that Double Face, and this is a total shot in the dark, will get around 400 points. My gut tells me 350, 400 points, but I'm hoping it gets more than Libido, which was around 407 points. Anyways, well, let's begin the GialliTally and review portion of the video. I must say that this video will be slightly different. For whatever reason, my Arrow Blu-ray of Double Face would not rip with the sound, not the English nor the Italian audio tracks, and I also couldn't get the subtitle tracks. I will try to be as efficient as I can, but I'll level with you. My rip only has the video, so when I put this review together, I will not be able to play any clips for you with the original sound or the soundtrack like I usually do. Lastly, because I don't have the subtitles for this rip, the clips I'm showing may not be in sync perfectly with things that are being said. I will try to be thorough with the plot, but I might spend less time than usual relaying to you most of the things that are being said. I am sorry, this is one reason this video is coming out later than I had intended, but I will do what I can to ensure the quality of this video is not affected. Beginning, as always, with the pre-viewing cliches. The repeat offenders are 1 point for actor, 3 for writer, 3 for composer, and 5 for director. This is most everybody's first giallo film with one exception. Nora Orlandi composed music for The Sweet Body of Deborah. 3 points. Cliché points for the title, Double Face. I'm gonna say double, alluding to a number, might be a bit generous, and face, a part of the body. So 5 plus 5, 10 points for the title. First look, we have 25 points for the Italian director, and an additional 15 points for the influence bonus of this being a proto-giallo. And would you look at that, it is plot o'clock. We have a cold open. The movie just starts, 5 points. We open on a high-speed police chase. Let's add reckless driving, 5 points, and car chase, 7 points. The car on the run is pretty hilariously destroyed by a train in an effect that seems more at home in a Showa-era Godzilla film. This is Inspector Gordon, and this is John Alexander, and this scene is in medias res. John mentions that everything has finally come to an end and that the events were meticulously planned. The opening titles hit, followed by the intense score by Nora Orlandi. Now, the movie doesn't tell us how far back we go in the narrative's telling, but I assume it's at least a month or so before the opening crash. As John narrates, he enlightens us on how he and his wife, Helen Brown, were originally in love before the passion left their relationship. The relationship started to fall apart once they settled in London. Exposition dumping, 2 points. John comes home to the sound of a song which will play numerous times in the film, not unlike that song from Orgasmo. V is for voyeur, extra for it overlooking an act of infidelity, 10 points. I may be being generous with voyeur right now, but I can give it again later in the film, so I'm just gonna get it out of the way right now. I is for infidelity, 5 points. Animals, a dog, a pet, 2 points. Queer characters, lesbians, 5 points. The movie is set in a manor or chateau, 5 points. Later at a horse race, the two talk about their failing marriage. Helen reveals she'd never busted his balls about his secretary. Touche, it seems. Helen rejects John's offer at a divorce. It wouldn't look good for the business, which, by the way, she mentions that she now owns 90% of the shares ever since her mother passed. John apparently did not know. Nor did he know that he has been named Helen's sole heir by her. Seems that despite their love loss, Helen doesn't plan on destroying John. Helen is about to head out somewhere, to which she offers Liz, her lover, to join her, to which she essentially says, "I can't, I have rehearsal." Been there, done that. Helen tells John that she has decided she must get away for a while and that it is for the best. John talks with Mr. Brown, his father-in-law, played by Sidney Chaplin, son of Charlie Chaplin. Mr. Brown says that Helen has grown into her mother with all her despicable traits of being selfish and spiteful. It seems that he takes John's side in the whole ordeal. Someone is sneaking about the garage and fiddles around with the Jaguar. We see a fucking time bomb set above one of the wheels before the scene cuts. G is for gloves, extra for them being black, 10 points. F is for fashion, 5 points. Helen is heading out now, alone, against the wishes of John. Before she goes, she asks her husband to pin her pearls around her neck. The scene shows us a few items: a snake ring on Helen's hand, a cigarette lighter of hers, and that she has a freshly healed scar on her neck, which surprises John, but he says nothing. Helen gets in her Jaguar and peels out. The car tears up asphalt for several seconds before blowing up, again as an obvious toy miniature. At the scene, the authorities rule it as a crash which led to the petrol tank exploding. A murder is faked as a vehicular accident, extra if we get an explosion, 10 points. Extra points for I is for infidelity for a murder occurring after the fact of infidelity. Another 5 points there. They confirm the burnt up body as that of Helen Alexander. This is corroborated by them finding her passport in the wreckage. John and Mr. Brown are on a plane with Helen's remains. Airplane, extra if characters are seen on the plane, 5 points. His father-in-law suggests he take some time to clear his head, which he agrees to. Inspector Gordon is enlightened about the recent events and the suspicious nature of the death and John being the sole inheritor. John returns from his sabbatical, but he seems distant in his thoughts. John is immediately confronted with his new responsibilities as the owner of the company, meaning he must make all the important decisions now. John's secretary, Alice, tries to show him some sympathy, but he is dismissive of her. She mentions that detectives are here to talk to him, and he invites them in. Inspector Gordon of Scotland Yard and Inspector Stevens of Liverpool introduce themselves and mention that the investigation into the accident is considered closed. They then ask him about his recent trip. Q is for questions, 5 points. It turns out that today is Helen's birthday. They ask if he will be returning to his house, then they depart from him. Foreign locales, London, 5 points. Urban locales, 2 points. As John enters his home, he is confronted by the song he'd heard Helen playing earlier. Z is for Zoom, 5 points. He grabs a candelabra and investigates the source of the music. Art, 5 points. John finds a strange woman showering in his home. He immediately moves to kick her out. N is for nudity, 5 points. This is Christine. After exposing her breasts, she mentions that she is 18 and without a home. John fixes a drink, which Christine asks for one as well. Throughout the scene, she flirts with John and acts rather childish. He ends up giving her a ride to some sort of 60s swinging party. She mentions that she still has the house keys. Hippies, extra for dancing, 5 points. Gratuitous 70s dancing, extra if naked, 5 points. Christine takes John into a back room where a friend of hers is showing films. The next one featured has Christine starring in it, and it is a stag film. Who else is starring in it? Well, John's late wife Helen, so it seems. K is for knife, 5 points. Extra points for Z is for zoom, for a zoom on eyeballs, at another 5 points, and E is for eyeballs, 5 points. In the film, Christine takes a knife and cuts the necklaces from Helen's neck. We are not sure if this really is Helen because her face is covered, but the ring, as well as the scar on the neck, are very suggestive. Lesbian or BDSM scene, 7 points. John immediately questions Christine about the film and when it was made. He says he wants to buy the print from her friend, Peter. She says she will find out for him. John questions a hippie who tells him to go to Peter's studio at the docks and inquire about Peter. He leaves. Then Peter comes out from hiding and insults the woman for divulging the information. He essentially tells her to keep her mouth shut, so let's add typical 1970s Italian misogyny for a man tells a woman to shut up, 2 points. John arrives at the studio at the dock. I'm going to go ahead and add extra points for art because the film which John is searching for is definitely central to the plot. So add another 5 points. John searches around, then is ambushed. He is beaten by numerous men. The next time we see him, he has somehow ended up at home in his own bed. Christine rescued him somehow. She tries on some of his wife's furs, prompting him to order her to take them off. She explains that she saved him because the hotel where she stays overlooks the studio. John pulls her onto the bed and begins copying a feel as he continues to question her about the woman in the film who resembles his wife, necking 5 points. John becomes distracted once she tells him that the woman in question is dangerous. Christine fixes the two of them drinks, but puts a sleeping drug in John's glass. Illicit drug use, extra for them being given against a person's will, 10 points, and sedatives taken, extra for it being with alcohol, 10 points. John almost immediately passes out. When he awakens, the same song is once again playing. He gets out of bed and again investigates the source of the music. He finds the music player plus his wife's cigarette lighter. Upon returning to the bedroom, John finds the sedative used to knock him out, plus that Christine has stolen all of his wife's furs. The next scene has John returning to the seedy dock region. He leaves his car and walks through the alleys, followed by a seemingly homeless man with a cane. Hard to tell if John actually loses the man, or the man simply walked past him, but regardless, in the end, John ends up at the hotel, being spied on by the pursuer and some of his friends behind a window. Inspector Stevens, U is for undercover, and extra points for an investigator being undercover, 10 points. In the hotel, the concierge tells him where he can find Christine, but implores him not to go up as she is with another man, but he makes no attempt to even stop him. In the room, he finds Christine and Peter, who sells John the film reel. He questions Peter on the woman, but learns nothing from him. Peter goes. Once alone, he slaps Christine. Typical 1970s Italian misogyny, woman is slapped, 5 points. Y is for yelling, extra for a hysterical woman yelling, 10 points, and add extra points for Q is for questions being yelled now, add another 5 points. Christine is being obstinate, and so John breaks a glass and threatens her with it. She tells him that she only knew her as the Countess, and that she was always picked up and dropped off, that she was married to a businessman, and that during one time they were filming a scene, the Countess whispered in her ear, "Call me Helen." Lastly, that she had gone crazy after a serious accident. This is everything she says she knows. John tosses the broken glass and leaves her. At home, John is watching the reel. He pauses, rewinds, and replays the moment before the necklace is cut, showing the same scar that his wife had had upon her neck before her demise. I'll add extra points for K is for knife, for the blade reflecting the light. Add another 5 points. John tries to contact his father-in-law but cannot get through to him. T is for telephone, 5 points. He stows the film print in a roll-top desk next to a pistol. John finally is able to speak to Mr. Brown. He tells him all about the stag film and his theory that Helen is still alive. He suspects someone may be holding Helen against her will and using the film to blackmail the two men. Mr. Brown rejects this theory. John leaves. The two inspectors were in fact hiding in the other room, and when they question Mr. Brown about his son-in-law, Mr. Brown defends John, saying that he does not believe that John could possibly have murdered his wife, but he fears that he is starting to go crazy. The inspectors are back with the remains of the Jaguar, and they find evidence of sabotage from an explosive device. John is now showing Mr. Brown the film, but something is amiss. The ring is missing. So is the scar. It seems that this mystery woman might not be Helen. I want to point out how odd it is that John is showing his father-in-law a stag film with a woman whom he believes to be his father-in-law's daughter. Mr. Brown goes to leave. He tells John that he is crazy for thinking that Helen could even be involved in such a scandal. John tells him that he will tell the police to reopen the investigation, but Mr. Brown says that such a thing would only make them all look bad. Their family, Helen, John, and their business. He finally goes. John removes the reel from the projector and gets ready to burn it, but the doorbell rings. Inspector Gordon comes in. He inquires about the film print sitting in the fireplace, causing John to ask him outright why he is here. Gordon simply asks him, "Did you love your wife?" After a moment, John says, "Yes." Gordon then realizes an absurd amount of clocks and watches in the room. John is a collector and repairs them as a hobby. Gordon leaves, but before the two part ways, John tells him that the clock in the Jaguar was the only one he could not fix and that the time always ran about an hour fast. The phone rings again, and John goes to answer it. First person POV, 5 points. He answers the phone, but nobody is there. Inspector Gordon summons the case file, satisfying a curiosity he has about the particulars based on the new information John gave him that evening. We hear a flashback of the inspector stating that they had arrived on scene at 6 and the accident was believed to have happened an hour before, and the clock of the car shows 6 o'clock. John returns to the hotel, again being spied upon as he enters. The concierge says she's not there, so John leaves. John then stops by to see Liz, his wife's lover. He asks if Helen had reached out to her recently. She relents and tells him yes, she has, but her voice was strange. Helen repeated that she did not want to see John or anybody else ever again. He leaves. John finds his secretary, Alice, sleeping. They talk briefly, and finally it seems that John has warmed up to her again. The scene cuts, and we can only assume that the two of them had gone up to the devil's business. John now questions Alice about things. She tells him that Mr. Brown has been defending him to the inspectors, who suspect John is involved in his wife's demise. John leaves the room and Alice rummages through his things. She finds a ticket for a Japanese Airlines. I'll say odd clue, 5 points. She remembers that someone had called and that they had said that the Countess has returned home. John rushes back to his house. Close-up of a door handle or someone entering through an ajar door, 5 points. He searches. The furs are back. Suddenly he hears the sound of their dog yipping. He follows the dog outside as it runs into a car with a woman dressed in black, covering her face but wearing the snake ring of his wife. She takes off. John wanders about the city, going in and out of pubs, and is getting more and more pissed as the night goes on. The bartender receives a call, and the woman on the other side tells him to tell John that Liz says that Helen is at the St. Anne's Cathedral. John overhears the bartender repeating this and rushes to the cathedral. Inside, he finds the woman in black with the ring and the scar. He tells her that she is not Helen. He rips her veil off and reveals horrific burns all over this woman's face. She says that she is miserable now and she wants him to kill her to end her suffering. She hands him the pistol, and John is about to do it, until he rips the face off, revealing it to be a mask and Liz to be underneath it. Typical 1970s Italian misogyny, woman is saved by a man, or men, 10 points. The inspectors and Mr. Brown barge in, stopping John from harming Liz, but they do not arrest him, to the dismay of Mr. Brown. They do, however, slap the darbies on Mr. Brown. The inspector says he recorded his secret phone calls Mr. Brown had made to Liz as conclusive proof that he had killed his daughter, and that he tried to set up John for the would-be murder which they narrowly prevented just now. Liz then scolds Mr. Brown, saying that she had warned him that his plan would never work, especially because it involved her being set up to die. He calls her an ugly idiot, then runs away. Typical 1970s Italian misogyny, woman is called an idiot, 3 points. S is for secrets, 5 points. Hidden identity of the killer until the final moments, 5 points. I'll also go for betrayal by the killer, 5 points. Hold on, I want to stop briefly to point out that this climactic reveal sort of drops the ball in terms of the writing. In both the Italian dub with the English subtitles and the English dub, Liz refers to Helen as Mr. Brown's stepdaughter, but she is definitely his daughter. I point this out because for over an hour I was re-watching parts of the film to get to the bottom of things and concluded that they just flubbed that part. I also mistook Liz for being Christine the first 2 times I watched this, and then for over an hour I wasn't sure if this was actually Helen. Maybe it's my history of cataracts speaking, but I had to resolve this confusion by finding this IMDb photo from the climax with the credit of Annabella Incontria for me to realize definitively that this is Liz. Not Christine, and not Helen. I'm sorry, the wig doesn't help. I digress. Mr. Brown escapes and fires a few shots. He hops into his car and speeds off. This is all looking very familiar. We hear a voiceover of Inspector Gordon explaining to John that he had suspected Mr. Brown after they had arrested Christine and Peter, and that they had confessed to tampering with the film, and finally that the Jaguar clock was an hour fast, yet Mr. Brown correctly knew when the accident had occurred. 5 o'clock, despite the clock on the car reading 6, revealing himself as the killer, as only the killer could have known when the bomb went off. The killer is killed accidentally, 5 points. The killer is hilariously punished in their own death scene, 12 points. Inspector Gordon says that Mr. Brown did John a favor because otherwise he would have killed her. Although, in the English version, he says that Mr. Brown did him a favor because otherwise John would have killed him. Whatever. The song revs up one last time, and the film ends. And that's Double Face. I like this one. This was my first time seeing this film, which was for the channel, and I was very pleased. I enjoyed the direction, Kinski's portrayal, and the plot, which is a bit of a hybrid with the krimi genre of the time. I've seen some people online saying the film is subpar for giallo films and is boring, and I could see why someone would say that. There are a lot of scenes where Freda really takes his time, and there are certainly tens of more engaging and more original giallo films, but I see why this one was restored and given a Blu-ray release. I did predict who the killer was, but I do not fault the movie for that. The movie to me is very much what it has been described as and what it was originally sort of marketed as, and that is a giallo krimi hybrid. There are better gialli and there are better krimi, but this one does a very decent enough job of just straddling the line. Plus, it also employs some gothic elements from the older Italian horror films and the new sexy-giallo tropes, which had recently started appearing in cinema. Real quick, I'm going to add L is for lies, 5 points, and O is for obsession, and extra points for that for John being the sleuth being obsessed, 10 points. I didn't get an alibi in the film, so I'm not adding that. I didn't see any J&B bottles or labels, so I'm not adding that. Let's segue to the GialliTally cliches for this movie. Post-giallo viewing cliches. The reason for the killings? Greed and gain, 5 points. The reason for the investigation? Well, on one hand, we have the police investigator, but the main investigation is John's journey, which is rooted in an obsession to find his wife. So, 10 points. Add another 5 points for John being an amateur sleuth. Bonus points. The style bonus. This film is fairly stylish, but it doesn't draw attention to it, which is nice. We have colored lights, some zooms, a POV shot, a focus rack, some effects, and nice moody shots. It's not as heavy as many other giallo films we've covered, but it does just enough and maybe more of what we come to expect from these films. It also utilizes a lot of the swinging 60s atmosphere and feels like a nice farewell to this decade. Out of 25 maximum points possible, I'll give Double Face 20 points for its style bonus. Soundtrack, yes, 15 points. Bad effects, yes. So far, the most I've ever seen in a single giallo. Model cars and trains, rear projections, stock footage which sticks out like Klaus Kinski at a swinging sex party, and a subpar scar effect. 15 points. Final look, extra points. The dead pool tallying how many kills and deaths are featured in the film. I break it down as thus: 10 points per kill or death scene for the main Deadpool, plus any stylistic kill multipliers, which we didn't add yet, plus the knife kill bonus. We have Helen, vehicular, which adds 9 for 19 points total. Mr. Brown, also vehicular, another 19 points. Extended Deadpool for those other deaths mentioned but not seen, I'll give 3 points for each, but we don't have any. Red herrings for the total number of legitimate suspects in the film. 5 points per legit suspect are awarded. This film is packed with red herrings. John Alexander, 5 points. Helen Alexander, 5 points. Mr. Brown, 5 points. Liz, 5 points. Alice, 5 points. Christine, 5 points. And Peter, 5 points. Flashback sequences. I'm gonna say none. I do not count this little part where the inspector's voice is heard, and the in medias res opening is more of a flash forward, and I'm sorry, but I just don't consider this the same thing as a flashback. Nudity. I award 5 points for ass, 7 for breasts, and 10 for genitalia, and there are a lot of breasts. Breasts, 7 points. Breasts, 7 points. Breasts, 7 points. Breasts, 7 points. 2 sets of breasts, 14 points. Breasts, 7 points, and breasts again, 7 points, for a total of 56 points for nudity. Ladies and gentlemen, for Double Face, I awarded the film an A to Z score of 15 out of 26. With the bonus points for these, we have a modified score total of 120 points. And for the full GialliTally score, I award Double Face a GialliTally score of 539 points. Compared to Orgasmo with 484 points, Double Face is now the new leader for the GialliTally, with The Girl Who Knew Too Much in third with 452, Blood and Blacklace in fourth with 422, and Libido in fifth with 407 points. I predicted that the movie would end up getting around 350 to 400 points, so I am shocked to see it steal the first place position. The excessive use of nudity and the large cast of red herrings did most of the heavy lifting in this GialliTally. But like I've stated before, these points don't mean a movie is better or worse. Don't forget the audience submissions. For these film reviews, I will be accepting memes you, the viewer, submit to me created from still shots or GIFs from the movie with some accompanying text. The best ones I will feature in the follow-up video whilst giving you a shout out for your submission. I will also separately be accepting the best still shots from the film, inspired by the idea of every frame being a painting. This portion will be called Giallo Shots. Submit any of your memes or best film frames for Double Face to me at icaruscrispy@gmail.com. Please do leave a comment in any of my videos letting me know you've sent a submission, otherwise I don't really check that email. Please like this video, share it with your friends if they are horror fans or cinephiles, subscribe to The King in Giallo if you haven't yet, and if you have any questions, thoughts, curiosities, or concerns, leave those below in the comments section and I will get back to you. Give The King in Giallo a follow on Instagram and a like on Facebook. Next time on The King in Giallo will be the Forgotten Giallo Films Episode 11, 1969 Part 2, and then the overview, review, and GialliTally for the 1969 proto-giallo Perversion Story, directed by Lucio Fulci. Thank you all very much for your continued support here. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time. I gotta take this stuff off so I can smack you. You ugly bitch. Oh my god. That's your daughter, sir. It's such an awkward scene. Like, no music. Just Kloski's like, I swear, dude. Father has been doing this so he could then be the sole inheritor. He wants the whole thing to himself. Ah! Oh, okay, I called it.
Und ich schwöre dir, dass du reden wirst alles erzählen.